There is a question that almost every person who has ever loved a narcissist eventually asks. Not at the beginning, when everything feels electric and overwhelming and almost too good to be true. Not even in the middle, when the confusion is so thick you can barely breathe. But later, much later, when the dust has settled and you are sitting with the wreckage of something you gave everything to, and the question is this: why did they need me to be less? Not just less demanding, not just less emotional, less confident, less certain, less connected to other people, less trusting of your own instincts, less everything. Why was your smallness so important to them? Why did your growth feel like such a threat? The answer lives inside one of the most misunderstood psychological structures in human behavior. And once you understand it, you will never look at what happened to you the same way again. Here is the foundation. A narcissist does not have a stable sense of self. This is not poetic language. This is clinical reality. Beneath the confidence, beneath the charm, beneath the carefully constructed image of someone who seems to need nothing and no one, there is a core that is almost entirely hollow. Psychologists call this an unstable or fragmented ego structure. It means their sense of who they are does not come from the inside. It cannot sustain itself, so it has to be constantly fed from the outside. And that feeding has a name: narcissistic supply. Narcissistic supply is essentially external validation used as a substitute for an internal identity. Attention, admiration, control, fear, worship, and dependency. All of it becomes fuel. All of it temporarily fills the hollow place inside them. And you, with your empathy, your sensitivity, your willingness to love deeply, you were one of the most potent sources of supply they had ever found. But here is the part that changes everything. Supply does not just need to be positive. A narcissist does not only feed on your admiration. They feed on your doubt. They feed on your confusion. They feed on the moment you second-guess yourself and look to them for confirmation of your own reality. Every time you shrunk, every time you apologized for something that was not your fault, every time you chose their comfort over your own conviction, that was supply. You were quite literally fueling their sense of existence. Now think about what happens when you stop shrinking. Think about what happens when you start trusting yourself, building yourself, choosing yourself. The supply does not just decrease. The entire architecture collapses. Your growth does not just inconvenience them. It destabilizes them at a level most people never see, because most people are never looking for it. There is a concept in psychology called narcissistic injury. It refers to any perceived threat to the narcissist's self-image or sense of superiority. And research consistently shows that narcissistic injury does not require a dramatic event. It does not require public humiliation or direct confrontation. Something as quiet as you no longer needing their approval can trigger it completely. You simply becoming more grounded, more aware, more whole, registers in their psychology as an attack. This is why they worked so hard to keep you small. It was not cruelty for the sake of cruelty, although it may have felt that way. It was maintenance. Keeping you uncertain kept them stable. Keeping you dependent kept them powerful. Keeping you slightly broken kept them whole. Your limitation was their foundation. And this is the part that is going to sit with you. They did not keep you small because you were weak. They kept you small because you were powerful. Because somewhere beneath every layer of conditioning they put on you, there was something in you so bright, so capable, so genuinely magnetic that they needed to manage it, contain it, redirect it back toward them. They saw what you were before you fully saw it yourself. And when you finally did see it, when you started becoming it, everything we are about to talk about next was set into motion. Because the moment you changed, they had a choice to make. And what they chose will tell you everything you need to know. It does not happen the way most people think it does. There is no dramatic confrontation. No single moment where you stand up and declare that you are done being diminished. No speech, no breakdown, no ultimatum. In fact, the moment a narcissist first realizes you have changed is almost always triggered by something so small, so quiet, so seemingly insignificant that you probably did not even notice you did it. Maybe you did not text back immediately. Maybe you declined a plan without over-explaining yourself. Maybe they said something designed to make you feel small, and instead of shrinking, instead of apologizing, instead of filling the silence with anxious reassurance, you just looked at them, steady, unbothered, and said nothing. That was the moment. That tiny, quiet moment of stillness was louder to them than any argument you ever had. Here is why. Narcissists are exceptionally skilled readers of people. Not because they are emotionally intelligent in the way we normally think about it, but because their survival depends on monitoring the behavior of their supply sources with extraordinary precision. Research in psychology describes this as hypervigilance to social threat. They are constantly scanning, constantly measuring, constantly tracking tiny fluctuations in your energy, your responsiveness, your availability, your need for their approval. They know the rhythm of you better than almost anyone. And the moment that rhythm changes, even slightly, every internal alarm they have goes off at once. Think about that for a second. While you were busy surviving the relationship, they were busy studying you. And what they built was essentially a psychological map of your patterns. Where you were predictable, where you were vulnerable, which words made you doubt yourself, which situations made you reach for their validation. They knew your map intimately, so when you started quietly redrawing it, they felt it immediately. The specific triggers that alert a narcissist tend to fall into a few distinct categories. The first is emotional distance. Not anger, not coldness, but genuine neutrality. When you stop reacting to their provocations with the emotional intensity they depend on, when their words start landing differently because you are no longer as invested in managing their perception of you, that neutrality registers as a 5-alarm emergency in their psychology. Emotional distance signals that the supply is drying up. The second trigger is visible confidence. This one is particularly threatening. When you start making decisions without consulting them, when you stop second-guessing yourself in their presence, when your posture changes, when your voice carries differently, when you start taking up space in a room in a way you never quite allowed yourself to before. They see it, and it terrifies them in a way that often shocks people when they finally understand it. The third trigger is outside connection. New friendships, a stronger relationship with family, a therapist, a community. Any evidence that your world is expanding beyond them activates something primal. Because part of how narcissists maintain control is through isolation. Not always physical isolation, but psychological isolation. The quiet erosion of your outside connections until they become your primary mirror, your primary source of reality. When you start rebuilding those connections, you are not just gaining support. You are dismantling the architecture of their control. And here is the psychological fact that will stop you mid-thought. Studies on narcissistic personality patterns show that narcissists often begin their counterattack not when you leave, not when you confront them, but weeks or even months before you have made any conscious decision to change the relationship at all. They respond to the energetic shift before you have even fully acknowledged it yourself. They feel the future before you have chosen it. That is how attuned they are to the threat of your growth. So by the time you started noticing their behavior changing, by the time things started escalating or shifting in ways you could not quite explain, the truth is they had already been responding to a version of you that was waking up, a version of you that was becoming undeniable. And once they confirmed what they feared, that you were no longer the same person they had, carefully shaped, they made a decision. A strategic, calculated, deeply revealing decision about exactly how to respond. And what they chose next is something you absolutely need to understand. Because it follows a pattern, a very specific, very predictable pattern that we are going to break down completely, starting right now. Here it is, the section you came here for. Because everything we have covered so far, the psychological foundation, the hollow ego structure, the moment they felt you changing, it was all leading to this, the actual behavior, the specific, calculated, often breathtaking things a narcissist does when they feel you slipping away, And I need you to pay close attention here, because recognizing these patterns is not just intellectually interesting. For many people, it is the difference between being pulled back in and walking free. The first thing they do is resurrect the person you fell in love with. Suddenly, without warning, the warmth returns. The attention returns. The version of them that made you believe in the relationship in the first place reappears as if it never left. Psychologists call this love bombing, but in this context it is more specifically called hoovering, named after the vacuum brand, because the intention is to suck you back in. And it works so devastatingly often because it does not feel like manipulation. It feels like proof that you were right to love them. It feels like the relationship you always believed was possible finally arriving. What you need to understand is that this version of them is not a return. It is a performance. And it has an expiration date tied directly to the moment they feel they have you secured again. The second thing they do is manufacture urgency and crisis. Suddenly they are unwell. Suddenly there is an emergency. Suddenly they need you in a way that makes leaving feel not just difficult, but genuinely cruel. This is not always conscious calculation, but it is always strategic. It exploits the very empathy that made you a target in the first place. And it is almost impossible to resist for someone who genuinely loves deeply, because the fear of abandoning someone in their moment of need goes against everything you are. The third thing is triangulation. They introduce or reintroduce a third party, an ex, a new friend, a colleague, whose purpose is to make you feel replaceable, competitive, and suddenly desperate to reclaim their attention. Where you were pulling away, now you are leaning in. Where you were gaining clarity, now you are consumed by comparison. Triangulation is one of the most psychologically precise tools in the narcissistic arsenal, because it redirects your focus from your own growth back onto them. The fourth thing they do is subtle sabotage. This one is the most insidious because it rarely looks like what it is. They undermine your new confidence with perfectly placed comments. They create chaos right before your important moments. They introduce doubt into your new relationships and opportunities in ways that seem almost accidental, almost supportive. The sabotage is designed to slow your growth just enough that you start to wonder whether you were really ready to change at all. The fifth thing is the smear campaign. While some of their moves are aimed at pulling you back, this one is aimed at punishing you for leaving. They begin quietly reshaping the narrative to the people around you. Suddenly you are unstable, ungrateful, the real problem in the relationship. This serves two purposes. It protects their image and it isolates you from the support system that is making your growth possible. The sixth thing is the cold withdrawal, the complete opposite of hoovering. Silence, indifference, a sudden and total removal of all attention and warmth designed to make you chase them, to make you prove your loyalty, to make you so destabilized by the withdrawal of their energy that you forget entirely why you were pulling away in the first place. And the seventh thing, the one that catches almost everyone off guard, is that they tell you the truth, not honestly, not vulnerably, but strategically. They suddenly admit to things. They acknowledge patterns. They say the words you spent years waiting to hear. And they do it precisely when they sense that those words are the last remaining key to bringing you back. Each of these 7 moves has one thing in common. And when you understand what that one thing is, you will never be fooled by any of them again. But first, we need to talk about something that might be the most important reframe in this entire video. Because there is a reason you kept interpreting their desperate behavior as love. And the truth about why is something almost nobody in your life has ever explained to you properly. I want you to think about the most desperate thing they ever did to keep you. The most intense, the most emotional, the most overwhelming display of what felt like need. Maybe they sobbed in a way you had never seen before. Maybe they showed up somewhere unexpectedly. Maybe they said things so raw, so vulnerable, so perfectly calibrated to everything you had ever needed to hear, that for a moment, just a moment, you thought, this is it. This is real. They really do love me. And I want you to hold that memory gently, because what I am about to tell you is not going to invalidate your pain. It is going to explain it. And there is a profound difference between those two things. That desperation you witnessed was real. The intensity was real. The urgency was real. But it was not love. And the reason most people cannot see that, the reason it is so convincingly indistinguishable from love, is because we were never taught the psychological concept that explains the difference. A concept that, once you understand it, will reframe your entire experience in a matter of minutes. The concept is called object constancy. It comes from developmental psychology, originally from the work of theorist Margaret Mahler, and it refers to the ability to maintain a stable, loving feeling towards someone even when you are hurt, angry, or separated from them. Most emotionally healthy people develop this capacity in early childhood. It is what allows you to be frustrated with someone you love, and still fundamentally know that you love them. It is what allows love to be a continuous state rather than a conditional transaction. Narcissists, due to early developmental disruption, largely did not develop object constancy. What this means in practice is profound and devastating. They do not experience you as a whole, consistent person with your own interior life. They experience you as a function, as a role you play in relation to their needs. When you are fulfilling that role, providing admiration, stability, validation, emotional labor, you are idealized. When you are not, when you grow, when you pull back, when you begin to exist outside the story they wrote for you, you are experienced not as someone they love who has changed, but as something that has stopped working. This is why their reaction to your growth does not feel like heartbreak, because it is not heartbreak. Heartbreak happens when someone who loves you loses you. What a narcissist experiences when you outgrow them is closer to what a person feels when and something they depend on is taken away. It is loss, yes, but it is the loss of function, not the loss of a person. Now here is the part that explains everything. Narcissistic injury, the psychological wound triggered when their self-image is threatened, activates the same neural pathways as physical pain. Research from the University of Michigan found that social rejection and physical pain are processed in overlapping regions of the brain. So when a narcissist feels you slipping away, they are not being dramatic. They are genuinely in something that registers as agony. But that agony is about their injury, their deprivation, their destabilized ego, not about love for you as a separate human being. Think about the difference between someone who is devastated because they miss who you are and someone who is desperate because they need what you provide. One grieves a person, the other grieves a resource. The behavior can look identical from the outside. The tears look the same. The words sound the same. But the origin is completely different. And the origin is everything. This is also why their recovery after losing you is often shockingly fast. Healthy grief takes time because it is processing the irreplaceable loss of a specific person. Narcissistic recovery is faster when it needs to be, because what they are really looking for is replacement supply, a new source, a new mirror, someone else to keep the hollow place temporarily filled. You were never the problem. You were the solution they found to a wound they have been carrying since long before they ever met you. And here is what that means for you personally. The guilt you have been carrying, the quiet, devastating guilt of feeling like your growth hurt someone who loved you, that guilt was built on a misunderstanding they needed you to have. Because there is something happening inside you right now. Something about your own identity, your own grief, your own confusion about who you are outside of this. That is just as important as anything we have talked about so far. And it is the part of this journey that almost nobody warns you is coming. Here is something that almost nobody talks about when they discuss leaving or outgrowing a narcissist. Everyone focuses on the narcissist behavior, the manipulation, the tactics, the psychology of what they do. And that matters. But there is a quieter, more disorienting experience happening on your side of this that can feel just as destabilizing as anything they ever did to you. And it usually arrives not at the moment of leaving, but afterward. In the silence. In the stillness. In the unexpected emptiness of finally being free. It arrives as a question. A simple, terrifying question that you were not prepared for. If I am not who I was in that relationship, then who am I now? That question is not weakness. That question is not a sign that you made the wrong choice, or that you need to go back, or that the relationship meant more than it should have. That question is the first honest thing you have asked yourself in a very long time. And the fact that it frightens you means you are finally awake enough to ask it. Here is the psychological reality that most healing content skips entirely. Long-term exposure to narcissistic dynamics does not just damage your self-esteem, it restructures your identity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, over months or years, the relationship becomes the architecture around which your sense of self is organized. Your routines, your emotional patterns, your way of interpreting reality, your understanding of what you deserve and what love looks and feels like, all of it becomes shaped by and oriented around the dynamic you were living inside. Psychologists call this phenomenon identity erosion, and it happens not through dramatic abuse alone, but through the accumulation of thousands of small moments where your reality was questioned, your instincts were overridden, your preferences were minimized, and your sense of self was quietly redirected towards serving the needs of someone else. By the time you begin to outgrow the relationship, you are not just leaving a person, you are leaving the version of yourself that was built inside it. And that version, no matter how diminished, no matter how painful, was still familiar. And the human psyche will grieve familiar things even when they were hurting us. This is why so many people describe the period after outgrowing a narcissist as feeling paradoxically worse than the relationship itself. You expected freedom to feel like relief, and sometimes it does, but it also feels like disorientation, like standing in a room where all the furniture has been removed. The walls are still there, the space is still yours, but nothing is where it used to be, and you are not quite sure how to exist in it yet. And then there is the guilt, the particular, grinding guilt that comes with growing beyond someone who needed you to stay small. Even knowing everything you now know about narcissistic dynamics, even understanding object, constancy, and narcissistic supply, and all of the psychological frameworks that explain what happened, there is still a part of you that wonders if your growth was selfish, if your healing was a form of abandonment, if becoming yourself cost someone else something real. That guilt is one of the most sophisticated tools the narcissistic dynamic leaves behind, because it does not require the narcissist to still be present to work. It runs on its own. It was installed so deeply, so gradually, so expertly, that it continues operating long after the relationship ends. And it is one of the primary reasons people return, not because they miss the person, but because the guilt of becoming themselves feels unbearable without resolution. Here is what psychology and neuroscience both confirm. The grief of outgrowing a toxic relationship is real grief. Brain imaging studies show that the pain of social loss activates the same regions as physical injury. You are not being dramatic. You are not being weak. You are processing the loss of an identity, a future you imagined, a version of love you believed in, and that deserves to be honored, not rushed. But here is what that grief is actually preparing you for. Because the confusion you are feeling right now, the disorientation, the not quite knowing who you are yet, that is not the absence of your identity. That is the space your real identity is beginning to move into. And before that can fully happen, there is something you need to understand about the specific stage you are in right now. Because depending on where you are in this process, what is coming next for you looks very different. And knowing which path you are on changes absolutely everything about how you navigate what comes next. Right now, in this exact moment of your life, one of three things is happening. And the reason I want you to identify which one it is, really sit with it, really be honest with it, yourself about it, is because each one requires a completely different response. Each one carries a different danger, and each one, if misread, can pull you back into something you have worked so hard to move beyond. So let me describe all three. And as I do, I want you to notice which one lands in your body. Not just your mind, your body. Because your nervous system already knows the answer, even if your thoughts are still trying to negotiate with it. The first is the guilt trip. This is the most emotionally sophisticated of the three responses because it does not look like manipulation. It looks like pain. It sounds like vulnerability. It presents itself as consequence, the idea that your growth, your healing, your decision to become more yourself has genuinely devastated someone who loved you. The guilt trip comes in many forms. It might be a message that arrives at exactly the right moment, telling you they are struggling without you. It might be a mutual friend who mentions, almost casually, that they have never seen them like this before. It might be their sudden visible decline in health, in happiness, in stability, displayed just prominently enough that you cannot miss it. And the message underneath all of it is the same. Look what you are doing. Look what your leaving is costing. Is your growth really worth this? If this is what you are facing right now, here is what you need to understand. Genuine pain does not require an audience. Genuine grief does not perform itself in the direction of the person it needs something from. What you are witnessing is not the unfiltered collapse of someone who loves you. It is a carefully directed communication designed to reactivate your empathy and redirect it back into the relationship. Your compassion is not wrong, but it is being used as a lever, and recognizing that is not cruelty. It is clarity. The second response is the Hoover. Unlike the guilt trip which pulls on your empathy, the Hoover pulls on your hope. This is the return of the person you fell in love with. The sudden warmth, the renewed effort, the promises that carry the exact weight of every unmet need you ever expressed. The Hoover is psychologically devastating because it arrives as evidence. Evidence that change is possible. Evidence that the relationship you always believed could exist is finally showing up. And the cruelty of it is not in the intention alone. It is in the timing. It always arrives precisely when you are strong enough to almost leave, but not yet strong enough to fully trust yourself. If this is what you are facing, the single most important thing you can understand is this. The behavior you are seeing right now is not the new normal. It is the exception made to prevent the permanent loss of supply. Research consistently shows that hoovering behavior returns to baseline within weeks to months of the person being secured again. You are not seeing who they have become. You are seeing what they are willing to temporarily perform. The third response is the final discard. And this one is the most disorienting because it feels like it should be a relief, and instead it feels like devastation. The final discard is when they withdraw completely, replace you visibly, and rewrite the narrative of the relationship in a way that erases your significance entirely. Suddenly you were never that important. Suddenly the relationship was not what you thought it was. Suddenly there is someone new, and they are receiving everything you spent years asking for. If this is your reality right now, I need you to hear this clearly. The discard is not proof that you were not enough. It is proof that you became too much, too aware, too boundaried, too whole. You outgrew their ability to manage you, and they moved to someone they believe they can still control. The discard is not rejection. It is confirmation. All three of these responses, as different as they feel, are pointing to the same thing. A narcissist who has registered that they are losing you and is responding from a place of profound psychological panic. But there is one more response. One that tends to come later, quieter, more final, and in many ways the most revealing of everything. Because what happens when they realize you are not coming back at all, not through guilt, not through hope, not through pain, is something that will answer questions you have been carrying since the very beginning of all of this. There is a moment that comes after all the tactics have failed, after the guilt trips landed on boundaries you finally learned to hold, after the hoovering met a version of you that could see it clearly for what it was, after the discard was met not with desperate pursuit, but with quiet, dignified stillness. There is a moment when a narcissist faces something their psychology is almost entirely unequipped to process. The permanent, irrevocable, undeniable reality that you are gone. Not angry, not waiting, not secretly hoping they will change, just gone, whole, elsewhere, free. And what happens inside them in that moment is one of the most psychologically revealing things you will ever understand about this entire dynamic. The first thing that happens is rage. Not always visible rage, not always the explosive, dramatic kind that announces itself. Sometimes it is a cold, controlled, quietly devastating rage that expresses itself through other channels. Through the stories they begin telling about you. Through the subtle but systematic destruction of your reputation in shared social circles. Through the way they look through you, if your paths cross, as if you have been erased from their reality entirely. This rage is not about missing you. It is about the profound narcissistic injury of being left by someone they believed they had permanently secured. In their internal narrative, people do not leave them. People are discarded by them. Your permanent departure inverts that narrative in a way that their ego structure genuinely cannot accommodate. The second thing that happens is replacement, and the speed of it will take your breath away if you are not prepared for it. Research on narcissistic relationship patterns consistently shows that new relationships begin not after the grieving process, but instead of it, because there is no grieving process. There is only the urgent need to restabilize the supply system. The new person is not a reflection of how little you meant. They are a reflection of how immediately the narcissist needs external validation to function. They are not moving on. They are patching a wound with another person. And that person, if you could reach them, if they could hear you, is standing exactly where you were standing when this all began. The third thing is revisionism. This is perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated response of all. The narcissist begins rewriting the history of your relationship in a way that serves their current psychological needs. Suddenly the relationship was not significant. Suddenly you were the unstable one, the difficult one, the one who could never be satisfied. Suddenly, the years you shared are compressed into a narrative where they were the patient, generous, misunderstood partner, and you were the one who failed the relationship. This revisionism is not entirely conscious. Research into narcissistic memory suggests that they genuinely begin to believe the revised version. Their psychology requires a story in which they are never truly at fault, never truly vulnerable, never truly affected by loss. And so the story is rewritten to provide that. Here is the part that matters most for you personally. All three of these responses, the rage, the replacement, the revisionism, will at some point find their way back to you. Through mutual connections, through social media, through the ambient awareness that comes with having shared a life with someone. And when they do, they will be designed, consciously or not, to destabilize you, to make you question the validity of your own experience, to make you feel simultaneously too significant and not significant enough, to pull you back into the orbit of their narrative, just long enough to remind them that they to still have power over your emotional state. Your job when that happens is to remember this. Their rage confirms your boundaries worked. Their replacement confirms they needed supply, not you specifically. Their revisionism confirms that the truth of what happened lives in your experience, not their retelling of it. You do not need their acknowledgement. You do not need their grief to validate your loss. You do not need them to tell the story correctly in order for your healing to be real. But here is what nobody prepares you for on the other side of all of this. The work that remains is not about them at all. It is about something much older, much deeper, and much more transformative than any relationship you have ever been in. It is about the part of you that was there long before they arrived, the part that made you available for this in the first place. And what you are about to discover in that territory is both the most challenging and the most liberating thing in this entire journey. What if the most important question you could ask right now is not why did they do this to me, but what inside me made this feel like home? I want you to sit with that for a moment before you react to it, because I know how it can sound. It can sound like blame. It can sound like the very narrative the narcissist used against you, that you were the problem, that you invited it, that it was somehow your fault. That is not what this is. Not even close. This is something far more profound, far more compassionate, and far more powerful than blame. This is shadow work, and it is the difference between surviving a narcissistic relationship and being genuinely transformed by it. Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists who ever lived, introduced the concept of the shadow as the part of the psyche that lives beneath conscious awareness. It is not the evil part of you. It is not the broken part of you. It is simply the part of you that was never allowed to exist in the light. The needs that were taught to feel shameful. The desires that were told were too much. The boundaries that were never modeled for you. The anger that was too dangerous to express. The worthiness that was never confirmed early enough or consistently enough to feel real. Jung believed, and decades of psychological research have since supported, that what we do not integrate consciously, we attract externally. The shadow does not disappear because we refuse to look at it. It finds expression in our patterns, in our choices, in the dynamics we enter and re-enter with an almost magnetic inevitability until we finally turn toward it and ask what it is trying to show us. So here is the shadow question that applies directly to your experience. Not what is wrong with you, but what unmet need, what unhealed wound, what unconscious belief about your own worth made the narcissistic dynamic feel, at least initially, like something recognizable, like something that made sense in your body even when it did not make sense in your mind. For many people who end up in narcissistic relationships, the shadow contains a profound and unexamined belief that love must be earned, that worthiness is conditional, that the right amount of patience, understanding, forgiveness, and selflessness will eventually unlock the consistent love they always needed. This belief does not come from nowhere. It almost always comes from early attachment experiences. A parent who was emotionally inconsistent. A childhood environment where love felt unpredictable, where you learned to attune yourself to someone else's emotional state as a survival strategy, where your needs came second so consistently that placing them second began to feel like love itself. The narcissistic relationship did not create this pattern. It activated one that was already there. And this is not a condemnation of your history or your healing. It is the most important map you will ever hold. Because it means that the work of genuine recovery is not just about understanding what they did. It is about understanding what you brought to the dynamic from your own history and choosing, consciously and compassionately, to heal it. Jung also wrote about what he called the wounded healer. The idea that our deepest wounds, when integrated rather than suppressed, become our greatest sources of wisdom and strength. Many of the most empathic, perceptive, genuinely powerful people carry wounds that made them extraordinarily sensitive to the emotional states of others. That sensitivity was not a mistake. In a healthy environment, it is a profound gift. In a narcissistic dynamic, it became a liability. The work of shadow integration is essentially the work of reclaiming that gift and learning to direct it with boundaries, with discernment, with the kind of self-knowledge that makes exploitation nearly impossible. This means looking honestly at the places where you abandoned yourself, the moments you silenced your own instincts to keep the peace, the times you translated their cruelty into a language of love because the alternative, that this was not love, was too devastating to accept. The ways you made yourself smaller, not because you were forced to, but because some part of you believed that was the price of belonging. Seeing those moments clearly is not self-punishment. It is self-restoration. It is the retrieval of every part of yourself you left behind in order to make that relationship work. And when you complete that retrieval, when you bring those parts home, something extraordinary begins to happen. Something that goes far beyond psychology, far beyond healing in the conventional sense. Something that touches the deepest and most ancient part of who you actually are. And it connects directly to the reason this specific experience found you. Not randomly, not accidentally, but as part of something much larger than either you or the narcissist ever fully understood. I want to tell you something about the person you are becoming. Not the person you were before the relationship, because that person, as beautiful as they were, was not yet complete. And not the person you were inside the relationship, because that person was surviving, not living. I want to tell you about the person who exists on the other side of all of this. The one who has done the work, faced the shadow, sat with the grief, and come through it, not just intact, but fundamentally, irreversibly transformed. Because that person is closer than you think. And they are unlike anyone you have ever been before. There is a phenomenon that researchers have begun studying in earnest over the last 2 decades, called post-traumatic growth. And it is exactly what it sounds like. Not just recovery from trauma, not just returning to baseline, but genuine, measurable, lasting psychological expansion that occurs as a direct result of having moved through profound suffering. Studies from the University of North Carolina found that the majority of people who navigate serious relational trauma and do the conscious work of healing report not just a return to their former functioning, but a level of self-awareness, emotional depth, relational clarity, and personal strength that significantly exceeds who they were before the experience began. In other words, this was not just something that happened to you. This was something that was happening for you. And the distance between those two prepositions is the entire journey. So what does this person actually look like? What does life feel like on the other side of genuinely outgrowing a narcissist and doing the work that follows? The first thing you notice is the silence. Not an empty silence. Not the anxious, walking on eggshells silence you learn to navigate inside the relationship. A different kind. A full silence. The silence of a nervous system that is no longer in a constant state of threat assessment. The silence of a mind that is no longer spending enormous amounts of energy managing someone else's emotional reality. For many people, this silence feels strange at first, almost wrong, because hypervigilance had become so normal that peace felt like a warning sign. But gradually, with time and gentleness, the silence begins to feel like what it actually is. Space. Yours. Finally and completely yours. The second thing that changes is your relationship with your own instincts. One of the most devastating long-term effects of narcissistic relationships is the systematic dismantling of your trust in your own perception. Gaslighting, reality distortion, the constant subtle suggestion that what you felt was wrong, what you saw was misunderstood, what you knew was somehow evidence of your own instability. All of it erodes the most fundamental navigation system you have. But on the other side of healing, that system comes back, quietly at first. A feeling in your body before a thought arrives in your mind. A knowing that precedes explanation. You begin to trust that again. And when you do, your entire life begins to reorganize around truth rather than management. The third transformation is in how you love. This is the one that surprises people most. Many people fear that after a narcissistic relationship, they will become closed, guarded, unable to love with the openness they once had. And there is a period where protection is appropriate and necessary. But genuine healing does not close the heart. It matures it. You do not stop loving deeply. You stop loving desperately. You do not stop giving generously. You stop giving at the expense of yourself. The love that exists in you after this work is not smaller. It is cleaner. It is offered from wholeness rather than from need, from genuine choice rather than from fear of abandonment. Your boundaries stop feeling like walls and start feeling like the most natural expression of your self-respect. Your solitude stops feeling like loneliness and starts feeling like the most honest relationship you have. Your sensitivity, which was once exploited as a weakness, becomes the extraordinary gift it always was, now protected, now directed, now wielded with the kind of wisdom that only comes from having survived its misuse. And the people who enter your life after this transformation are different. Not because the world has changed, because you have. You are no longer sending out the frequency of someone who needs to earn love. You are sending out the frequency of someone who knows they deserve it. And that shift, quiet as it is, changes absolutely everything about who finds you. You are not who you were. You are so much more. And there is one final thing I need to tell you before we close. Something about the spiritual dimension of everything you have just survived. Something about why it happened to you specifically, and what it means for everything that comes next. What you're fed throughout this journey is not just a pattern of relationships or emotional pain. It's a pattern of awakening. At first, it starts quietly. You question yourself. You replay conversations. You try harder to be understood, to be valued, to be chosen. And when that doesn't work, you start turning inward, wondering what is wrong with you. But slowly, something begins to shift. You stop chasing explanations that were never going to be given with honesty. You stop trying to fix people who were never interested in change. And in that space, something powerful happens. You start seeing clearly. You begin to recognize that what you called confusion was actually clarity forming. What you called heartbreak was actually redirection. And what you called loss was actually release. When a narcissistic dynamic fades, it often feels like chaos on the surface, but underneath it, it's exposure. It reveals truth. It shows you where your energy was being drained, where your boundaries were missing, and where your empathy was being used instead of valued. And the most painful part becomes the most liberating truth. You were never too much. You were just in the wrong place, giving your depth to someone who only understood surface. And for the empath, the healer, the deeply feeling soul, this is where transformation begins. Not when you are loved perfectly, but when you finally stop abandoning yourself to be loved at all. Because the moment you choose yourself without apology, the entire dynamic collapses. Not because you became colder, but because you became whole. There is a quiet power in that realization, a strength that doesn't need revenge, validation, or explanation, because you no longer need to be understood by people who were never willing to see you clearly, and that is freedom. And maybe the most important insight you will carry from all of this is simple, but life-changing. You were never the problem trying to fix your life. You were always the awakening happening inside it. Every loss, every silence, every betrayal was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of your awareness. So if you are in that space right now, where things feel uncertain, where people are falling away, where your old identity feels like it no longer fits, understand this is not collapse, it is alignment. You are not being abandoned. You are being guided back to yourself. And if this message reached something inside you, don't ignore that feeling. It's not random. It's recognition. If you found value in this, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next in your journey. Like this video if it resonated with your experience, and share it with someone who needs to hear this truth right now. And I'd really like to hear from you. Comment below what part of this story felt like it was speaking directly to you. Because sometimes healing doesn't start with answers. It starts with finally realizing you were never broken. You were becoming. Drop a like if this helped you out today.